You're listening to the Chris the Freelancer podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Chris the Freelancer podcast. This is the podcast all about location independence, time freedom, and living life on your terms. Each week we interview a new guest on the show, and today I'm sitting down with Dylan Wolff, a remote web developer that built his digital nomad career from scratch after leaving behind a career in accounting. In this week's episode, we talk about how Dylan made a decision to switch things up and change careers in his early 30s to become a jet-setting digital nomad developer, all within a few short years. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 10 with Dylan Wolff.
For show notes and more, visit christhefreelancer.com.
All right, I'm here with Dylan Wolff. You might remember him from my YouTube video on how to become a developer. He's also been on my Inspiring Nomads blog series. And I guess the reason why I've been putting out a lot of content with Dylan in it and really sort of featuring his story is I think it's an excellent example of somebody who's made the conscious decision to prioritize living the location-independent lifestyle and building a career to facilitate that. So thanks very much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast, as well as a guest on the blog and a guest on the YouTube channel.
Definitely, mate. More than happy to do it, always.
All right, well, let's start right at the beginning. When did you decide that you wanted to be location-independent? How did that idea form, and what was the first steps?
Yeah, so I think it was probably about November 2014, I think. And at the time, I just turned 34. And I was in a job that I'd been doing for 4 or 5 years at that time, which I enjoyed, but I didn't feel it was particularly fulfilling. You know, it wasn't what I wanted to be doing for the next 4 or 5 years, let's say. So I guess I sat down and I thought about where I wanted to be over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, and living and working overseas is something that I've always wanted to do, and I guess for whatever reason I've always felt that it was a little bit out of reach. And it was at the same time that I discovered some blog posts from people like Pieter Levels and discovered the hashtag Nomads Slack channel and some other things, and started thinking about firstly realising that, you know, fulfilling this dream of travelling long term and working at the same time was actually achievable, but then started thinking about, okay, well, what are the steps that I need to take in order to actually make this happen? So I guess the first step was to think about, okay, as I'm travelling, I need to be generating an income if this is to be a sustainable thing that I can do long term, and started to think about, you know, what are the skills, what sort of skills could I develop that would enable me to work remotely, and what was the intersection between those things and the things that I was interested in. And after, you know, I probably ruminated on this for, I don't know, two or 3 weeks or so, and came to the conclusion that web development was the way to go, because that's something that I've always been interested in. And then basically just set about learning to code, you know. So really, for the first time in my life, I think I'd set myself a goal that I had told myself that not meeting that goal just would be unacceptable. And that was really the approach that I took.
Okay. Well, let's back it up a bit. I think I asked too many questions in the one question then. I think that was like 3 questions in the one question. So where did this wanting to travel sort of thing come from? Was it you didn't feel like you got enough in the last 10 years or whatever? Where was that wanting to travel? Where did that come from?
So I guess I'd gotten a taste for it when I was about 21 or 22 and did the thing that a lot of young Australians do and backpacked around Western Europe for 4 or 5 weeks solo, which was a life-changing experience. And I've done bits and pieces of travel since then, but I guess I just saw, you know, living and working abroad as an opportunity to broaden my horizons a little bit. And I guess you think about, you know, life back home was pretty easy. Yeah. You know, there were day-to-day routines were fairly static, and there weren't too many decisions you needed to make each day or too many things you needed to worry about. And I guess I just felt like my life was on autopilot a little bit. And, I guess you think about personal growth, I think, occurs when you're forced to step outside your comfort zone a little bit. And certainly, the 6 months that I've been living this lifestyle, I can see, the changes in myself. So I think it's been a worthwhile move for sure.
And going back to that moment I guess time period where you discovered the location independent movement, did you already have the idea of people working remotely on their computers, or were you looking at, maybe I'll do the more traditional working holidays, maybe take a secondment or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think I'd always known that it was possible to work remotely in, some sort of digital industry. Yeah. I guess, they're just not skills that I've ever had. So I've never seen that as being a possibility. And it wasn't until I discovered Levels and some other people and read some other really inspirational blog posts that I decided the time had come to actually make this thing happen and set a goal for myself and actually achieve it. And, it turns out that learning to code is something that I've really enjoyed and something that I think I've got a bit of an aptitude for. So that's been a great choice, but it's given me the freedom to travel for the last 6 months or so and spend some time in Chiang Mai and some time in Tokyo and Seoul and Kuala Lumpur and a bunch of other places and meet some other really inspirational, like-minded people. So it's something that I'm really glad that I decided to do. Definitely.
I wonder how many people have been inspired by the Pieter Levels story, because that's another thing we share in common is that. And it's funny, actually, because I haven't met many other people that have been inspired by him. And it's more, I guess, the developer types, the ones that really want to make something. Because, I hear, other people that are famous, particularly in this area. Johnny FD has inspired so many people to come out, especially to Chiang Mai. And a lot of those people want to have online businesses because that's the example that he sets. But for me, it was like Pieter Levels, and I was always wondering whether I was the only one that was that article, the 12 startups in 12 months, whether that was just me. But it looks like, I don't know, in your developer circles, have you met anybody else who's been sort of inspired by that? I guess people in #nomads look up to him.
Yeah, I think particularly here in Chiang Mai, I mean, look, I haven't checked recently, but the last time I checked, I think there were maybe 800 or 900 people in the Chiang Mai channel. So undoubtedly, there would be a lot of people here in Chiang Mai that are here really because of the platform that he's developed, I think. In terms of my sort of circle of friends, I haven't really heard him mentioned too much. Yeah. Like, I know you and I have spoken about Levels a bit, and when I went down to Jeju Island to spend some time at JSpace, I met Pieter, which was a mind-blowing experience, was really crazy. But, I think he has demonstrated that it is possible. And, the Slack in particular is a fantastic resource for making this sort of lifestyle a bit more approachable to people, because as I did when I first came to Chiang Mai, having done some research and reached out to some people on the channel, you can sort of hit the ground running, and it's not quite so intimidating, and moving around fairly regularly is not so intimidating as I think it otherwise would be.
So for the people that are listening who are like, who's this Pieter Levels guy? Basically, he founded the startup Nomad List, which is a website you can go to. But he's since expanded that kind of brand into multiple things. Nomad Trips, where you can put in your trip plans and sort of see where you match up with other nomads, other people traveling. There's a blog. There's also what we mentioned, the Slack channel. So Slack is a group messaging kind of app, and you can find that at #nomads.com, right? So Blake, who was the first guest on the podcast, I actually met through #nomads. And I think it's a great resource to use when you're in Like, for example, I haven't used it in a long time because Chiang Mai is just such the hub. It's like almost you don't need it. Yeah, you don't need it, and Facebook's good enough. But like when you go to some place like Bali, I guess you can hang out the co-working spaces. But somebody mentioned, there's this event on, and Bali's great for partying. Let's be honest. We haven't actually, surprisingly, nobody else has really talked about the hashtag nomads, but that's a great resource that I'd recommend to everyone listening.
Yeah,
for sure. Speaking of resources, what sort of resources did you use starting out to get started? And even before getting started with web development, how did you make that choice? Was it an easy choice to make? I tell a lot of people that web development is probably one of the best jobs to do remotely. I'd probably say it's the best job overall to do remotely, because every experienced developer I've met has done a remote stint, either in Chiang Mai or worked from anywhere in the world, really, because it's such in the culture of developing, it's something you can do remotely. And at both firms I worked at last year, they both had days where you could work from home. So was that what you were thinking about with web development? Was it like, this seems like the best one? Or did you kind of try it out first and have other ideas?
Yeah, look, I think, from sort of taking stock and thinking about, what are the things that I'm interested in and what are the things I might be good at, web development was an obvious first choice. When I was a kid, when I was, 15 or 16, I toured around building, websites on GeoCities and Tripod and all of those sort of things. And I'd actually, when I finished high school, I'd actually had a uni place lined up to go and study multimedia. Yeah. And sort of, through a succession of circumstances, I fell into full-time work. So I never ended up going to uni to study it. But I don't know, I guess it's something I've always been interested in, and at the time I'd always wondered, how does Facebook work, or how does Twitter work? They're not static websites, they're web applications. And I guess I'd set myself the challenge of answering those questions. Yeah. And to touch on what you were talking about working remotely, I guess. I've been really fortunate, and maybe we'll talk about this some more later, but to have found the company that I work for back home, which has a pretty long history around working remotely. So there are 3 directors of the company, and at various times they've all worked from places like the Philippines, from Iceland, the people that have worked from New York while they've been travelling. We've got a guy who lives in Bangkok and works 100% remotely. So that was a really good fit for me. And I guess when you think about it, with communication tools like Slack and Basecamp and those sort of things, in this industry doing this type of work, there's no reason why you should have to be in one place. I think, when you're working remotely, and I've certainly found, the onus is on me to be reliable and to be online when I say I'm going to be online, and to be productive and all of those sort of things. But I think, that's a pretty reasonable trade-off, to have pretty much complete freedom, in my case, to work from literally anywhere. As long as you're turning up, and as long as the work is getting done, and as long as you're communicating with your colleagues, then it really, it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter where you happen to be.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to get into how you sort of found that job and the remote stuff, a little bit later. But what resources did you use starting out, and how did you get started learning?
Yeah, so I guess when you're starting to learn to code, it's a very overwhelming position to be in, because there's so much stuff out there to learn, and I guess I decided to start at the very start and just started learning some fundamentals. So started learning some HTML and CSS through resources like teamtreehouse.com and Code School and Codecademy and some of those other free resources. And that was all going pretty well. And then I'd sort of thought that I might benefit from something a little more structured. and there's a company in the US called Thinkful. Okay. And Thinkful sort of combine self-directed learning with one-on-one mentoring sessions once a week. Okay. So I guess the advantage there is that you're learning, you're learning on your own. You're building a real project. So it's, I guess, the trade-off with something like Codecademy or Team Treehouse is that, in order to make it accessible to absolute beginners, you do all of your work within the browser. Yeah. So they show you just the piece of code that they want you to be working on at that given moment. Mm. And you do all your work through the browser, which means you don't have to go through the hassle, I guess, of setting up your local environment. So, installing Ruby and managing gems and setting up a text editor and all of those sort of things. I guess where Thinkful was good is that it's a little bit more self-directed. So it forced me to learn how to do those things. But the great thing about the mentoring aspect was that, I could go off and I could spend a week working on a project and then catch up with someone, for an hour once a week to talk through what I'd actually produced, and get some real feedback, and suggestions, and, get pointed to some other resources that might be helpful. And, that was the particular course that I did. I think the nominal length of that was 2 months, and I think I got through it in about 4 weeks, simply because it was, I was enjoying it, and I was learning loads and making some good progress, so I was able to rip through it fairly quickly.
And you were doing this all while working full time?
Yeah. So I guess the last career I had involved a lot of interstate travel. So more often than not, I'd be travelling during the week. Which, look, that was kind of difficult for other reasons, because it's, the routine of getting up ridiculously early on a Monday morning to go to the airport to travel on business, for 3 weeks out of every 4, it's not great. But I guess the advantage it gave me is that it meant that, I'd get back to the hotel of an evening and be pretty much free of the distractions that you would have if you were home. So, being at home, you've got mates that want to catch up for dinner or have a beer or all those other sort of things that are going on. So it meant that I had a solid, 2 or 3 hours of an evening to really focus on the things that I was learning, and to dedicate that time to getting better, basically.
Yeah. Would you have any advice for people that are struggling to find the time? Because we had we answered a question. There was a question like, how long can I expect to start learning and get a job? But it's like so dependent on many factors. And I, for instance, I was at university at the time and had a part-time job as well. And I made my Tuesdays free, and I just would go to a co-working space, and that whole day would be focused study. And then any other days that I had, any other half days, I'd go to the co-working space, which was my focused zone, and work on learning it. But, I admire people like yourself that have found the time after the mental kind of strain of working a full day as well. So, do you have any, I guess the good thing about, being away from your friends and distractions was good, but anything else you kind of, any challenges with it?
I think, every decision I think you make in life is a trade-off. So however you choose to spend your time, there's always something else that you could be doing with that time. I guess, it comes down to how badly you want it. And I decided that it was something that I wanted very badly, and I didn't want to have to spend, necessarily 2 or 3 years learning to code before I got a job. And I think, look, if I'd been at it for 2 or 2.5 years and hadn't found a job, then maybe that would be the point where I would have thrown in the towel and tried something else. It's definitely not easy. It's absolutely not easy. And particularly in my case, with the travel and working a full day and then coming home and spending another 2 or 3 hours getting stuck into learning this stuff. But I guess I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having a problem to solve. And that's the other thing too. I think if people are curious as to whether this might be, web development or web design or whatever, might be a good career choice for them, I think you'd need to just try it out. And I think, don't give up at the first roadblock that you hit, but you give it 3 or 4 weeks, or, give it a reasonable period of time. And I think, it's not something that everyone can do, and it's not something that everyone enjoys doing. And I think if you're to make a career out of it and for it to be sustainable, you've got to tick both of those boxes. So you've got to have some sort of aptitude for it, but it has to be something you enjoy. And I think if I didn't enjoy it, I really looked forward to getting back to the hotel at the end of the day to say, yeah, look, there's something that I was really stuck on last night, but I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it and working it out and fixing it and finding a solution.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. And the resource you said you use was called Thinkful?
Yeah, so thinkful.com was sort of the first paid resource that I'd used. And I think, the course that I did, I think it was just called Introduction to Web Development or something. And look, that was, as an absolute beginner, I found that useful. And they offer a few other programs. But so I guess, in terms of the other resources that I'd used, so I'd gotten through the Thinkful thing and had learnt a bit of JavaScript. And it was at about that time that I guess I came to the realisation that the front end stuff wasn't really something that interested me. Okay. So I wanted to learn a bit more about how a web application works. And it's at that point that I discovered Ruby on Rails.
Awesome.
So there's a really great book out there by a guy named Michael Hartle called The Rails Tutorial, and I think the website is just railstutorial.org. And it's from everything that I've read online, it's pretty much the canonical resource for learning Rails. So the book is, the PDF's about 500 pages long, and it's quite complex if you're new to Rails or new to Ruby. And I think I probably went through the book 3 times. So I went through the first time and didn't really understand very much of what I was doing. Went through the second time and understood a bit more. And then the third time that I ran through it, it all sort of started to make sense. So I guess, that's the other thing to remember, that, a lot of learning to code, I think, is about repetition. And looking over the same piece of code and going through the same processes, a number of times to really drill that stuff into your memory. Because there's, when you're learning to code, I think there's so much information that you need to be taking on board, and you would have to be a very special type of person, I think, to be able to take all of that stuff in first time around.
Yeah, it almost sounds like learning a spoken language.
Yeah, I think there's probably some parallels there.
Yeah, because we were talking about learning languages today actually at lunch, and one of the programs the only program that I found would work for me is Pimsleur, and they have a strong, it's very repetitive, it's not the most fun to do, but it drills it into you, and when you were talking about having to read the book multiple times, I was just thinking about my first Pimsleur lessons. Every time I learn a new attempt to learn a new language, I'm having to listen to that first episode multiple times just to get the flow of the language and the ups and downs, Yeah. All right, so cool. At which point were you thinking about, okay, now it's time to look for a job, or was it like, okay, I'm just gonna knuckle down and get good, and then at a certain point you're like, yeah, I'm good enough, or how did that come into it?
I think this is the really difficult thing. I found this really difficult to judge, and I think for other beginners it's probably a similar situation. But I think you don't really know when you're ready. I think at some point you just need to back yourself and put yourself out there and start applying for things. And if you're not successful, then take that on board as experience and use that to help you prepare better for the next role that you might go for. So I guess, for me, so I'd started learning to code in about November 2014, and then I think it got towards about the end of July or sort of mid-August the next year where I'd sort of decided, look, you know what, I've been at this pretty hard for 8 months or so. You know, no one is going to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, yes, you know, you're ready. So I just need to put myself out there and have a go. And the first job I applied for, you know, had a chat with one of the founders, and that was all going really well, and got given a coding challenge to complete.
Okay.
And got the thing and just completely panicked and realised that this was, you know, it was requiring me to know a bunch of stuff that I didn't know.
Oh, okay.
So that was pretty disheartening. But then the opportunity at the company that I'm with now came along, and I'd sort of found that listed on a Rails message board back home in Melbourne, where the Ruby and Rails community is really quite strong. They had a meetup tonight, Melbourne time, and they had 107 people go, I think.
Wow.
So, which is evidence of a pretty strong Ruby community back home. But and applied for that role and sort of heard something back within a couple of days, which was great, and was given another coding challenge to complete, and again, you know, got sent through the documentation, and you know, that's when the imposter syndrome started to kick in, I think. And then, you know, over the course of the next few days, I guess I just sat about, you know, breaking down the problem into sort of more approachable chunks, and, you know, started to make a bit of progress. And one thing led to another, I guess, and they were happy with the result that I'd produced. And then about a month later, I started, you know, and got the role. So, which was, you know, to go from knowing pretty much nothing about web development to being employed full time in 9 or 10 months or whatever it took is not necessarily what I expected to happen. Yeah. But I guess I'd always set myself the goal of achieving it within 12 months. Yeah. So for that to happen was it was kind of nice.
Yeah, I'm seeing even more parallels between our stories as well here. My first job I did, the project was easy. So they did the same thing to me. They gave me the project to sort of test it, but it was just like 2 sentences: create an app that has these relationships. Yeah. And I did it. It was pretty easy. I put, you know, a lot of effort into it, obviously, because I wanted to get started and get this job. And I even made it look nice when I didn't need to. The guy, my boss, the guy who hired me, we had a meeting with the other boss, because there was 2 partners at the firm, and then just like, the app was pretty good, and then he was just like, can I see it? And then this is the slightly less technical boss was like, can I see it? And then he's just like, oh yeah. He hadn't actually loaded it up in his browser. So he was seeing it. The more technical boss was seeing it for the first time and was like, oh yeah, it looks kind of nice. But he didn't care at all, because it was complete back-end firm. But what I found working there was, you know, kind of the same thing that happened with you on the initial project. But for me, like, the project was pretty simple. But then once I got in, oh man, it was the deep end for sure. And then after 5 weeks of working at that, but just feeling like I was just so far behind, and just sitting there, like, I'd be like, hey, I need help with this, and then they'd give me like a little bit of help, because they're busy with their own stuff. It's fair enough. Yeah. They'd be like, give me a bit of help, and then I get stuck 5 minutes later, and I was just like, wow, web development mustn't be for me. Yeah. And so I was really discouraged, like you. I was discouraged by it. But then in the second position I had, which I won't go in too far into the story of how I got into that, but the second position, it felt like it was a good match for my skill level. Like, I was obviously learning and pushing myself, but I was actually being able to do stuff from day one. My question for you is, when you started that first job, did you feel like a complete beginner and have so much to learn, or were you able to, you know, contribute from day one? Yeah,
look, it was definitely a challenge, and I guess the way I'd expected my first few weeks to play out would be that I would be paired with someone. So I might be paired with like an intermediate or a senior developer and work pretty closely with them from day one, really. So, to work on a project together. But kind of the way it worked out is that I was thrown in the deep end from about my second day, I guess, and given my own projects to work on and working with technologies that I'd had nothing to do with before. So working with things like Elasticsearch and, deploying applications to Heroku and AWS and all of these things that I didn't know anything about. Yeah. So the first few weeks were really difficult, and there were a lot of moments where I had questioned whether I'd made the right decision. Yeah. And if I'm honest, I still have that, and I think, I think imposter syndrome is something that's really well known as afflicting, developers of all experience levels. I think, I have days. I have good days where I'm productive and I've been able to solve problems and I feel like I've achieved something. Yeah. But I also have days where I feel like I've got nowhere, and I guess being part of a team, that makes me a little bit anxious because I like to be a contributor and I like to be productive and like to. To be contributing to the success of the team and helping the team reach the goal of, building whatever project it is that we happen to be working on. So I think, that happens from what I've read and from the people I've spoken to. I think developers of all experience levels feel that way from time to time. I think, when you're first starting out, I think you just need to be prepared for that. And I think you need to be prepared for the fact that there's, you might know a tiny proportion of the things that perhaps you think you should know. Yeah. But I think, when companies are hiring junior developers, they know, through the interview process, and if they have you complete a code challenge and those sort of things, I think generally speaking, they will have a pretty good grasp of where you're at. Yeah. And I think they don't expect you to know everything. So I think, a big part of being hired as a junior developer, at least from the people that I've spoken to, is, it's about your attitude and it's showing that you're willing to learn and you're willing to, you're not afraid to put your hand up and ask questions and admit that you don't know something. I think it's a lot more about soft skills than people maybe realise, because if you've been able to learn a bunch of things working on your own, when you think about if you're now in an environment with, I don't know, 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 other developers, you think about how much more knowledge you're going to be able to absorb simply by being around that group of people each day. So I think most companies hiring juniors realise that, but I think the important thing is that rather than, sitting by yourself and struggling for a day and getting nowhere, I think, one of the things that I found really challenging was knowing when to ask for help. So it's what you touched on before. It's finding that balance between, putting your hand up every 5 minutes and saying, "Hey, I'm stuck. Can someone give me a hand?" And then, against that, giving yourself sufficient time to try and work the problem and try and figure it out on your own. And that's something that I found. It probably took me maybe 2 months, I reckon, to find the sweet spot to say, look, you know what, I'm stuck on something. I'm going to work at it maybe for an hour. And if I get nowhere, then that's the time where I need to put my hand up and ask for help.
But I feel for those reasons, like being in a team, it's a great place to be in, because when I'm stuck, when I'm stuck by myself, I feel like really frustrated, like, wow, I might never get out of this. But if you're in a team and you're like, oh, I'm stuck, and then you feel, first of all, you might feel bad about yourself and you're letting everyone down, but then you ask for help. You have your team there to support you, and if two things are going to happen, either it's an easy fix and they'll help you out and you're not stuck anymore, or even they'll struggle a little bit, and then I find that's like a bit of validation, knowing that you're not a complete idiot and that, it is a bit of a struggle. One of the actual one of the challenges that I had when throughout doing it as a freelancer is like having a team there to support you. I don't know, you now work doing some freelancing, right? So how do you kind of is that a challenge? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I'm doing a bit of work on a Rails 3 application at the moment, sort of as a bit of a side project, which, Rails 3 is nothing, given I only started learning Rails about 18 months ago, it's nothing I've really had any exposure to, and some exposure to some JavaScript and some Angular stuff, which I don't really know anything about. And that's been its own challenge.
Yeah.
But I guess, I saw taking on some freelance projects as a great opportunity to just learn more, and I guess the great thing about working where I work is that we're not a single product company, so we're an agency, so I get the opportunity to work on a bunch of different things, and I guess, starting to take on some freelance projects just helps me broaden my base of knowledge a little bit, I suppose, and it's difficult, but I guess as you learn more and as you've been a developer for a little bit longer, you get a bit more experienced with solving problems and knowing where to go for information. And I think, that's a big part of being a developer. And I know it's something we talked about on the video the other day, is that you can't store everything you need to know in your head. So it's about knowing how to find the solution to a problem.
All right, well, I like to get into sort of the other part of I guess being a digital nomad, the travel and lifestyle part. But I have one more question, all right, about the remote developing. The remote job, the job that you got with the firm that had the strong remote culture that you're still currently working in, did you kind of single them out as a place that, okay, if I get a job at this firm, I can go remote, or were you looking at all firms and then maybe figuring out the remote thing later?
It was really just a happy coincidence, I think. So I'd seen the job listing, I'd seen the job posted, and I guess liked what I read and didn't know anything about the company at the time. And I guess fortunately for me, they've got a really strong culture around remote work. I think they're very well respected in the Ruby and Rails community, and we have directors speaking at conferences and things like that fairly regularly. So I think for me, it's like the planets aligned and everything had worked out perfectly as it should, I guess. So, to find somewhere that was happy for me to go remote after basically the only stipulation was that I spend the first 3 months in the office. Which makes total sense, so they can get to know me and I can get to know them, and I've basically now got total freedom to work from anywhere, as long as I'm around what I say I'm going to be around, and as long as I'm productive and I'm making a contribution, which is exactly the way it should be, I think. If
the stars didn't align and that coincidence didn't happen, and you had to kind of take a job that didn't have an obvious remote work culture, would it have been something you would have brought up from the start and said, this is my goal, or something you would have kept in the back pocket and said, hey, I kind of have this other goal that I want to work remotely?
Yeah, so it was actually, in this case, it was something that I'd mentioned throughout the interview process. Oh. And I think if the response had been, look, okay, we want you to stick around in Melbourne for 6 months or 12 months or whatever it might have been, I think I probably would have passed. Okay. And I'd actually, throughout the process of learning and starting to feel confident that I did actually know enough to start, getting a job or finding some work on the side or whatever, I'd actually set myself the deadline of that if whatever had happened, I think I had a ticket booked for about the 15th of September or something, I think, to come to Chiang Mai. Okay. And I'd basically said to myself that, okay, if it gets to this point and I don't have a job, I'm going to go to Chiang Mai anyway, and then spend, 2 or 3 months full-time learning as much as I can, and then start trying to find some freelance work. And then it was at about the end of August where this opportunity came along. So it sort of, just snuck in about 2 weeks before that deadline.
Wow.
But I think, I could have gone around in circles, looking for work for months and months, I suppose, if this first opportunity hadn't worked out, which is why I'd said, look, if it doesn't work out, or if by this date I don't have a job, I'm going to go and start travelling anyway, and I guess just back myself that I'd be able to learn enough to start picking up some work and start making some money.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, I recommend that to other people as well. I set a date, I think more than 6 months in advance, because basically the thing that I felt that was holding me back the most was my university studies and the lease on my apartment.
Yeah.
So I was just, we booked the flight on the day the lease ended. We were so like.
I actually watched the video of you guys packing up your apartment.
Yeah. That was like Here's a little secret that a lot of people don't know is I actually started vlogging like 5 weeks before I even left as like sort of practicing. And if anyone wants to see them, just message me. I'll send you the link. But the reason why I've set them to unlisted on the channel is it's totally irrelevant to remote work. And I'm not living the digital nomad lifestyle in them. I'm like, what am I doing? I think the first one, I'm just going to work or something, and just driving around basically and doing whatever. So I was just so excited to vlog that I already started vlogging like 5 weeks before, and that one I was not even sure if I was going to use, but I thought, it's relevant because we're moving out and we're talking about, packing our life into suitcases and stuff. So I kept that in. But if you guys want to see those hidden videos, send me a message. I'll send you a link. I personally don't find them that interesting though. Cool. All right. So I think we've hammered at the coding and remote work stuff. You can always send more questions if you have anything specific.
Definitely. Like, I'd love to sit down and do another Q&A video at some point in time, or if people want to send me questions directly, or part of the reason why we're sitting down and we're doing this, and why we did the video the other day, I guess from my point of view, is that it's a really good opportunity to hopefully encourage people who, like me, are maybe onto their third or fourth career and, in their 30s, that making this sort of lifestyle change isn't achievable. Yeah. Well, to demonstrate that it is, if I can do it, I think pretty much anyone can do it. So, it's just, it's a good opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't watched the video, we answer that question directly.
Am I too old to learn to code?
Yeah, and I even got on Facebook. I got a message from somebody after a few days after posting that video. Hey, I'm 30. Is it too late? And I'm just like, watch this video to the end. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so on the location independent thing, I think you're also a great example of somebody who's using that location independence. You're always moving about. Where are some of the places you've been so far?
Yeah, so I came to Chiang Mai initially, and I'd spent probably about six or 8 weeks here, I think, and then went and spent a month down in Kuala Lumpur. And look, Kuala Lumpur as a nomad destination, for me, it's not somewhere that I particularly enjoyed. I think part of the great thing about this lifestyle is the community, and I guess we're spoiled in Chiang Mai because there are so many other people here with which we automatically have something in common, because we're choosing to live our lives in this way. So spent a month or so in Kuala Lumpur, then came back to Chiang Mai for a little bit, and it was really bizarre. After having a month in KL and sort of not really falling in love with the place, getting in the taxi after arriving at the airport in Chiang Mai, and it actually felt like I was coming home, which was a bizarre feeling.
I get that as well. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was for somewhere that I'd lived for 6 weeks or something. That was really bizarre. So back in Chiang Mai for a little while, and then I had the opportunity to go down to J-Space on Jeju Island in Korea for I don't quite know how to describe it, sort of like a retreat, I suppose. I think to help promote the co-working space and help give some of the local sort of tech entrepreneurs on Jeju Island some resources, some people they could come and speak to and ask questions about this lifestyle and that sort of thing. So that was pretty cool. And then spent a month in Tokyo, which was off the chain. That was crazy. Yeah. And then back to Chiang Mai, where I've now been for a few weeks. And then I guess future travel plans in a few weeks. I'm going to the US for a little while, and then off to Berlin. So living the dream, pretty much. Yeah. To have the flexibility. I guess, being based in Asia or being in Chiang Mai, I guess, once you get over here from Australia or from the US or from Europe or wherever, everything else is really close by. And, whether you want to go to Ho Chi Minh City or Phnom Penh or wherever, nowhere is more than about a 2 or 3 hour flight away, and flights are cheap. So, you get yourself over here and a bunch of different destinations really open up for you.
Yeah. How do you balance the travel? Because it seems like you move around quite a bit. And it's something that Denise and I have found is that it's good. We almost feel like, we kind of need to have that base, and we're trying to still figure it out, whether we want to, have the base and be there, for a period. Like Chiang Mai for us, I think, is the base, and like have 2 months, and then we have to leave for visa reasons anyway, so maybe go away for a bit. You're on the move all the time. Yeah. Do you find that as a challenge, or? Yeah,
it's not. If I'd sat down and planned, my perfect 6 months, I wouldn't have moved around quite so much. And I guess it's only been because, the run to KL, I needed to leave anyway, again for visa reasons. So, and I thought, well, as long as I'm going there and I've not been there before, I might as well throw myself into it and spend a month there and see what it's like. And then it's kind of been, various other opportunities have come up since then, which I've taken, but it's been really difficult to balance moving around so regularly with also having a full-time role. So that I know that, okay, I've got to be around on Monday morning at, 8 or 9 a.m. Melbourne time or whatever it might be, and then sort of, I need to, wherever I go, there needs to be a co-working space or a cafe from which I know that I can be productive, and what's the internet like, and how quickly can I get a SIM card, and all of those sort of things. But I guess what moving around so much in the last few months has sort of taught me is that, the skills, I guess, now I know the things that I need to know before I go somewhere new. Yeah. So I need to research, okay, where in the airport can I get a SIM card? Or, where's a good co-working space near the places that or a good cafe near the places that I'm staying? So I guess it teaches you to, be a bit more agile in that regard. But I think I'm really looking forward to getting to Berlin, where the plan is to set up there for sort of 2 or 3 months and not have to think so much about moving around. I think from other people that I've spoken to, like Nick Danforth, I think published a blog post on this the other day that I think you need to find your own rhythm. So for me, the temptation has been, there's so much out there that I want to see and so many places that I want to go. The temptation is to try and do all of that, as quickly as I possibly can. Yeah. But I suppose, I'm approaching this, I don't have an end date. So I've got really at the moment no desire to go back home to Melbourne. So for me, whether I live like this for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, I want to make sure I give myself enough time to do the things that I want to do and go the places that I want to go to. So I think at some stage you just need to find your own pace and find the pace that works for you, because there's people that we know that move around or seem to move around every 2 weeks, and that would do my head in, to be doing that for an extended period of time, definitely.
Yeah. And you've sort of stuck around in Asia for a while now, and you mentioned the thing about being on the Australian time zone. Is that going to... How are you going to approach the challenge of when you go to the US?
That's something that we're definitely going to have to discuss. And look, and it's difficult because we work in a very collaborative manner, and we're communicating with each other on Slack throughout the course of the day, and we're asking for advice, and we're doing all of those sort of things. So I think Europe would not necessarily be so difficult because the time difference there is a little less. But I think definitely being in the US, fortunately, I think I've worked it out. I've only got about 6 or 7 working days in New York. So if I need to do something crazy like working split days or working overnight, which is not ideal, but for such a short period of time, I could probably deal with it. And maybe, I guess, you have to think about all of the people from the US, for example, who are in Chiang Mai. There's plenty of people we know that work ridiculous hours, which I guess maybe that's just the trade-off that you have to make.
And Berlin, like 3 months? Have you been there before?
Yeah, look, I sort of, 10 years or so ago, when I did the backpacking thing, it was probably my favourite destination of the trip. And I think Berlin is a lot like Melbourne in some ways, and I've been really fortunate in that a friend that I met here 3 or 4 months ago has been wanting to go as well. So everything's aligned really well that we're going to be there at the same time, and we'll be able to get a place together and do all that sort of stuff, which will be cool. And I know that, at least from what I've read on the Nomad Slack, that there's a pretty big Nomad community in Berlin as well. And I think, the cost of living is sort of somewhat comparable to Chiang Mai. I mean, it's a bit more expensive, but it's certainly not as expensive as it is to live back home in Melbourne. So all that stuff ticks a lot of boxes for me. Yeah.
No, it seems like you're definitely using the location independence to explore new parts of the world. Yeah. Is there any... Chiang Mai is so hard to beat, but is there anywhere else in terms of destinations to do remote work in, digital nomad destinations, let's say? Is there any other places you discovered, maybe there's one that's better than Chiang Mai for you? I'm probably not, but...
Look, I guess I haven't really been too far off the beaten track. I think, Chiang Mai is probably as far off the beaten track as I've gotten, having been to Seoul and to Tokyo and KL, and Jeju Island was a little bit different. So I found Korea really challenging, obviously not speaking Korean. So you think about Chiang Mai, English is everywhere in Chiang Mai, and that's not the case in Korea, which I found pretty tough. But certainly in terms of the places that I've been, Chiang Mai is very difficult to beat. But I think for me, I couldn't live in Chiang Mai. Well, I couldn't live anywhere too long, I don't think, because that would almost, in some regard, defeat the purpose of, developing this location-independent career, I suppose. But it's an unbelievable feeling to, I guess, have worked to achieve this goal, to have been able to leave Melbourne and to now to work from pretty much anywhere. And if I decided tomorrow that I wanted to pack up and go to, Vietnam or go to Cambodia or, go wherever for a couple of weeks, then I have the freedom to do that, which is quite surreal, I think, in a lot of ways.
I think that's a good place to call it. If people want to find out more about you, DylanWolff.com, right?
That's right. Yeah. Look, there's not a lot going on there at the moment, and I guess when I first started out, when I first came to Chiang Mai and started working remote, I'd sort of I'd told myself that I wanted to get back into writing blog posts and those sort of things, and there's just been too much going on. But certainly, I think in the near future, it's something that I would like to get back to doing. So let's say it's a watch this space, I reckon.
Okay, if you're watching this, listening to this, a few months down the track, it might be it could be the hottest web development site, in the world, maybe. No, probably not.
Don't pump it up too much.
All right, but yeah, check it out, see what's there. All right, thanks so much for coming on the show, Dylan.
My pleasure, man. Anytime.
Alright guys, thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about Dylan as well as everything else we just talked about in today's episode, you can find all of that information and more in the show notes. Just head to christhefreelancer.com/podcast/Dylan-Wolff. That's christhefreelancer.com/Dylan-Wolff. That's 2 F's on the last name. As always, thanks for listening. Be sure to hit subscribe, and we hope to see you in the next episode.